Órale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. I'm your host, Jorge Martin, and we're on YouTube, Familia. Please give us a like and subscribe, por favor. That would really help us. We are getting close to 100 subscribers. It's going to be huge. And we are continuing our NFL Insider series. We're going to Big D in a second. But first, I got to tell you, I got to remind you, go to fantasypoints.com, please. You know, when you go to fantasypoints.com, you're good. There we go. When you go to fantasypoints.com, you get some of the best fantasy analysis out there. I mean, they just started. They're in the midst of 32 days, 32 articles, 32 podcasts with key off-season moves. You got Scott Barrett's strength of schedule. You got Graham Barfield's pace and tendencies, data points from Chris Wecht and Brett Whitefield. Sorry about that. You got projected daily fantasy contributors from Joe Dolan and Jake Tribby. Joe Dolan just started an interview series with beat writers similar to this one. You got Dynasty Bylaws with Wes Huber. You got John Hansen's Final Points. Go to fantasypoints.com. When you put in the promo code Familia22, or if you want to do it in Spanish, Familia22, you get 10% off. Again, Familia22 when you go to fantasypoints.com. Let's get to it today, Familia. We're going to Big D. We're going to Big D, Familia. And we have a returning invitado to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. And he is the man from the Rio Grande, RJ Ochoa. I mean, he's the manager and editor-in-chief of Blogging the Boys. It's under the SB Nation umbrella. He just brought so much heat and so much great analysis last year, especially on the fantasy side. Had to bring him back. Otra vez, bienvenido to my amigo, RJ Ochoa. How are you doing, my friend? ¿Cómo estás?
Jorge, it's great to be with you. Great to make this an annual tradition. All's good here. It's really hot, and it's the summer, and it's the most dead part of the sports calendar. My sports interests right now are squarely focused on the world of baseball, and my Houston Astros. Sorry about that. Had a very bitter loss on Thursday night, so I'm a little upset about it. But other than that, everything's coming up large.
Well, you know what? I know that me being a Dodger fan, I should still be salty about it. And I was at Game 7. So, and where there were two pockets of people dressed in orange and yellow who were celebrating. The other 55,000 people walked out very quietly. But there's one thing. There's one person that keeps me from that says it's okay if they win, and that's Dusty. Dusty was my guy growing up, so he's still a Dodger at heart. If he wins a World Series as a manager, it's fine, because I know one of my favorite, and he was always very nice to me when I'd interviewed him in the past. So hey, you know what? I always root for Dusty. I rooted for Dusty when he was a Giant. I'll still root for Dusty as an Astro. So don't ask me about Altuve, though.
Yeah, I'm a little upset with Dusty based off of Thursday night, but that still warms my heart to hear.
Well, let's jump into the Cowboys. And there's one guy that I think has just warmed the hearts. He's really just taken over the town. We're going to start with number 4. And he's really numero uno in the hearts of Cowboy fans. I mean, it's Dak Prescott. He had kind of a weird season, though. In his first year back from the devastating injury, great overall numbers: 37 TDs, almost 4,500 passing yards. Some of it was a little inflated by that huge game in Week 18 when it didn't help anybody for fantasy. But he's lost some weapons a little bit and is still the QB7 ahead of Jalen Hurts, Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady. Kind of what's his outlook for 2022, especially now that he's a year away from that ankle injury?
So this is the first, I think you hear this trope a lot, but kind of the first normal offseason he's had in a really long time. Obviously last year, not only was he coming off the injury, but was still partly dealing with the contract situation. They did get that squared away, but that was, still something that kind of hovered and lingered. Obviously, 2 years ago, 2020 was the onset of the pandemic, and so that wasn't normal for anybody. And 3 years ago, 2019 was the first year that the contract negotiations were kind of a thing. So it's been a while, I guess is my point, since things have just been kind of chalk, have been kind of normal. In that time, he's obviously gotten paid. He's built a backyard or a football field in his backyard, rather, to work with his teammates and things like that. And so I think that there's a lot of optimism for Dak, just in a general sense, but in terms of an on-field sense, during the team's mandatory minicamp, he actually showed up, obviously looking a little bit leaner, a little bit more in shape, things like that. And the discussion, both from him and everybody involved, was that he might be running more, utilizing those legs, and that's something that a lot of Cowboys fans are excited about when it comes to on-field success. But I think from a fantasy perspective is obviously very valuable anytime. That's how, why Jalen Hurts is obviously an incredibly valuable fantasy option. And so I honestly think that the consensus is maybe a little bit low on Dak. I mean, you certainly know better than I do. But he had such a rough ending to last season, and the Cowboys really whimpered out of the playoffs, that I do think you can kind of buy low on him and still wind up with maybe a top 7, top 8 quarterback with some big weeks, like you mentioned. Losing Amari Cooper definitely hurts. But the expectation is obviously that CeeDee Lamb is going to be able to carry that fold, in his own right.
And that's the thing. I mean, you got some new weapons, and we'll get into the wide receivers in a few minutes. But there's no concern over the fact that that it's not that it's CeeDee. It's really going to be CeeDee Lamb as his main target, and Dalton Schultz a little bit with some guys that may be looking to prove themselves.
I think the concern would be just that it's a little unproven.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know off the top of my head where rookie Dak ranked in a fantasy perspective, but as far as his success, things, it was 4 years ago that the Cowboys released Des Bryant, Jason Witten retired, and they went at that 2018 season with what they called the wide receiver by committee. It was Allen Hurns and Tavon Austin and Cole Beasley and Deontay Thompson. It was really, really, really bad. The Cowboys were really bad as a team. They traded for Amari Cooper in the middle of that season, and that really unlocked Dak and unlocked the Dak that he's become since. And so I would say the only sort of point of speculation is we've never seen him be this elite quarterback without Amari. That's not to say it can't happen, but we've just never seen it before because Amari's been on the team since then. And so, there's expectation. And I wouldn't say more than expectation. The Cowboys are kind of banking on CeeDee carrying that wide receiver group. And it's not just, that. I mean, obviously, Michael Gallup's coming back from a torn ACL. People don't know how much time he's going to miss. And so for the first, maybe even month, I mean, it could be CeeDee, Dalton Schultz, James Washington, Jalen Tolbert, which makes things a little bit more difficult for Dak, but could lend a little bit more running, a couple more rushing touchdowns, at least in the early part of the season.
And that's the thing you mentioned about the rookie year. I believe he was still a top 10 quarterback, and because he was such a rushing threat, and he had great he had great weapons around him that year. I mean, it was a dream, and plus the fantastic offensive line. We'll talk about O-line in a bit. One thing that was a little interesting, I looked at his home road splits. And one thing that really stuck out to me, the touchdowns. He was 23 touchdowns with against 2 interceptions, and on the road that was at home, and he was 14-8, and on the road. Is that, can we come a little closer to the mean a little bit with him on that?
I think so. I mean, the one game he missed was a road game. It was in Minnesota. That was the Sunday night game that Cooper Rush started, and then. That's the second half of the season was really, really, really terrible offensively for the team as a whole. And a lot of those games were on the road. They were really poor on the road against Kansas City. They were really poor on the road. They did win in New Orleans. They were, as an offense, really poor on the road in Washington. They did win that game. But that was, that part of the season where the defense started to kind of come along, and they got some defensive scores, and that really helped the team in an overall sense. But I would say his best road game happened was that New England game that led to the injury that caused him to miss time right before the bye week. But that's never been a problem for him. That was actually something that people had an issue with Amari Cooper with. I mean, if there's ever been any player who's been examined from that perspective, like home road splits, it was Amari. He seemed to disappear all the time on the road. Dak has generally been the same guy, whether it's at home or on the road.
And do you think there's going to be kind of like a similar split between rushing and passing this year?
I would love to say no. I would love to believe that the Cowboys recognize that they have an elite quarterback and are willing to put the ball in his hands, but they they want to live and die with Zeke Elliott. They really believe that they have Emmitt Smith reincarnated, that they have the '90s Cowboys offensive line reincarnated, and they really they're Frank Sinatraing this thing. They want to do it their way, and to their own fault, to their own detriment. I mean, we saw that last season. Zeke. There's a very strong argument that even when healthy, Zeke Elliott's not the best running back on the team anymore. But despite that, they put him out there with a partially torn PCL for most of the season, and limited Tony Pollard. So I would love to believe that the passing game takes over, but they're going to try to make the run game a thing, and they're not going to try to make the run game a thing in the most efficient way possible. They're going to try to do it with Zeke because that's who they want to be. They want to be the team that Zeke Elliott is doing the feed me gesture for, scoring all the touchdowns for, and that's the way they roll.
You know what? That gives a good segue into Zeke. It came out after the season that he was playing with a pretty significant knee injury, which is so easy. And a lot of people have been really knocking him down in fantasy. It's hard to say if he lost a step because last year he was playing with an injury. He's 27. A lot of carries both in Dallas and at Ohio State. I want to talk about him, and then we could jump into Tony Pollard, kind of spelling him. But he's kind of going in that running back dead zone. Third, fourth round. Could he be a value there?
I do think, we recently did a podcast over at our site where we talked about the most overrated players in the NFC East, and then we did the most underrated players in the NFC East. And I think Zeke is both. I think Zeke is overrated because I think there's a lot of people who think he's Zeke Elliott. And, again, they just kind of see the dude who's on the posters and on the stadium walls and things like that. But I think he's underrated in that he's not trash. He's not the worst running back in the NFL. And when you factor in fantasy, when you factor in, I don't know, I would probably rather have Christian McCaffrey over Zeke. I mean, I'd probably rather have that lottery ticket just because I don't know what he winds up being. I don't know if Alvin Kamara is going to be suspended for 4 or 6 games or whatever the case may be. So, the opportunity is certainly there for Zeke. But so, yeah, I mean, I don't want to be the guy that takes a chance on him, but that could pay off. And it looked like, I think there were a lot of people who probably got him at a little bit of a value last year and did look like it was paying off. But where I would want to avoid Zeke in a fantasy world is he's one of those players, and again, you know this better than I do. There's certain players who you just can't bench. It doesn't make logical sense for you to bench in your fantasy lineup because it feels illogical. And Zeke is one of those guys. And so I wouldn't want that headache, but I could see him over delivering relative to expectation, but not being too functional of a player. And if he is productive, it's going to be the early part of the season. He's had to miss time, the last 2 seasons of his career, which is something that never happened before. To his credit, he's always been very, very, very healthy. But I mean, time is undefeated. Father time's undefeated, and it comes for everyone. And I could see the last point on Zeke is the Cowboys can get out of the massive contract they gave him in the spring after this season. And if they are notorious for anything, it is getting everything they can out of a player before they say goodbye. So I could see the Cowboys just running him into the ground, so to speak. So the opportunity will be there. I think that's something you can feel good about if you do wind up with him.
Tony Pollard was a little bit of a revelation last year. It was over 1,000 yards. Listening back, we talked about him, and you expected more production out of Zeke. We didn't know the knee was coming up. With Zeke playing a relatively full season last year, injury aside, he's still got his shares. Tony Pollard still produced. Could we look at a repeat performance, getting over 1,000 total yards, combining the rushing and the receiving?
I would bet against it. Just because I don't trust the Cowboys to do it. I mean, they've teased us before. They've said we're going to utilize both. We're going to put them both in the field at the same time. They've done those things before, but they've never stuck with it. They've always kind of fallen into their normal patterns and their normal behaviors, and that's 11 personnel with Zeke Elliott on the field, and Zeke Elliott, the guy they're handing the ball to down near the goal line. That's their DNA, and they don't have any interest in really changing that. And so, yeah, I think you could wind up with a Tony Pollard 26-yard touchdown that he kind of takes in, because he's that talented. But I wouldn't. That's one of those fantasy headaches that I wouldn't want. I mean, I could totally see it happening, but I wouldn't want to put myself in that position. Do I start, Tony Pollard or, I don't know, Leonard Fournette, things like that. Like I would trust the volume of a lesser player versus Tony Pollard, who is incredible and is very talented. But I mean, the Cowboys do not want Tony Pollard to be somebody who is a featured part of their offense while Zeke Elliott's still on the team. But to the point I made a little while ago, it is a contract year for Tony Pollard, so he will be gone after this season. So I mean, I could see them trying to get as much juice as they can out of him. But again, there's only room for one running back on their team, and it's Zeke Elliott.
Wow, that's love it. I love how definitive you are on this. This is fantastic because I've been kind of waffling, and I love coming to you for this. One guy that I know that I know delivered a solid season last year and is expected to have a big season this year. And you wrote about him recently on Blogging the Boys, CeeDee Lamb, talking about how he's kind of growing into his body a little bit more. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, CeeDee said he grew literally an inch over the offseason. I don't think that happens at the age of 23, but if CeeDee feels that, then I'm happy for him. And that's been his thing. I mean, he's he doesn't look like the last dude to wear number 88 for the Cowboys. Dez was this, I mean, Herculean god in a football uniform, and CeeDee that just doesn't fit that physical mold. CeeDee's always been great after the catch. That was kind of his thing at Oklahoma. We've seen him have that success, obviously, in spurts at the NFL level. But he still hasn't really become the alpha that we expected when he was drafted. Now, some of that has been the presence of Amari Cooper. Obviously, last season the Cowboys dealt with injuries and COVID issues like everybody else. But again, that's, I do think the consensus is probably low on him. I think, I don't know what your wide receiver rankings are like, but I can't imagine CeeDee is in the top 10 or 12 as far as, average consensus fantasy, rankings. And I think he will deliver because the volume will be there. Like, they are going to force him everything. And unlike Michael Gallup, he will be healthy at the beginning of the season. Dak Prescott has kind of, I think people read into these things a little bit too much, but Dak has made it a very, very strong focus to really bond with CeeDee. Again, this is a really lame football cliche thing, but he had CeeDee's locker moved next to his this offseason, just because he realizes, look, I'm the franchise quarterback. This is my number one wide receiver. We got to have a great relationship, and hopefully we're at this thing together for a very long time. And so that's the plan. And if the plan is successful, I think CeeDee Lamb's going to be somebody with 1,000, easily 12, maybe 1,300 yards, maybe 10, 11 touchdowns. He's not your big red zone, Dez, Julio, Calvin Johnson guy. But he's going to score a lot. That's the plan. They want to lean on him in the passing game.
And that one's just to answer your question. Fantasy Pros consensus ADP as of right now, which I think is a lot of dynasty and some early best ball, has him as the wide receiver 8. And going in the latter part of the second round. So he's going with he's in there with the studs. He's sandwiched between Tyreek Hill and AJ Brown. So fantasy community, I mean, it feels like there's the balloon is definitely rising for CeeDee, and obviously he's talented. Could that be? Sometimes I feel like when a team is on a player is on a high profile team like the Cowboys, and the expectation level is already high, and I think also because of losing Amari Cooper, is that also what's driving up his price tag?
Probably. I mean, he's on a visible team. He's a very visible player. He was in college. His name is CeeDee. He wears number 88. He's not just it's Michael Gallup has never had that same attention, right? Even though he plays for the same team, he's had a lot of success. But I mean, CeeDee just kind of has all the bells and whistles. But hearing where he's ranked, I mean, I would take CeeDee. I mean, again, I've got a far more humble fantasy resume, although I'm the only person in my league of record to win the league 3 times, which is a mandatory thing for me to say. But just relative to those two examples you listed with Tyreek Hill and AJ Brown, I mean, it's not CeeDee's first year in that offense, the way it is for those two wide receivers. I far and away trust Dak Prescott more than I trust Tua Tagovailoa or Jalen Hurts as passers. And what's more is A.J. Brown has to compete with Devontae Smith. Tyreek Hill has to compete with Jalen Waddle for targets. There's nobody. I mean, CeeDee is the guy. He is the show in town for the Cowboys. That makes sense, hearing it out loud a little bit more.
Oh, love it. Love it. Yeah. Sometimes it's great to be able to just kind of delineate everything and just kind of break everything down, live, just live like we're doing it right now. The remaining of the receivers, you mentioned Michael Gallup. He had the late season ACL injury. I had a long talk with Dr. Edwin Porras, the fantasy points injury expert, and he expects nobody back for less than 9 months. But usually it's like 10 to 12 months, which puts Michael Gallup around Halloween to Christmas on that time frame. Who's going to fill that void of like the second receiver? Could it be Jalen Tolbert, the rookie who's really touted and got a lot of talk about him during the pre-draft season?
It could be. He's had the ear of Dak Prescott from the very beginning. Dak actually spoke to several incoming rookies before the draft, just players that the Cowboys kind of had on their board that they would potentially be interested in. And right after being drafted, Dak Prescott sent Jalen Tolbert a playbook. That was like a big, fun story. So he's involved. James Washington is like the most slept on. I don't think he's slept on. I don't know that I believe in him. But he's the forgotten man. People do kind of forget that he was the Cowboys' first external free agent, this offseason. And so he has been injured or working through rehab at the beginning of things so far. And I don't know how much reservation you have there, but I do think your average fantasy league has probably forgotten that he exists. And so I think that he's probably, you could probably get him as like your fourth or fifth wide receiver and just kind of, I think he's probably going to catch a couple of touchdowns in that run, in that mix. I mean, the Cowboys don't just have Amari Cooper's lost production to replace and Michael Gallup's at the very beginning. They also lost Cedric Wilson in free agency. So they have a lot of bodies that are new. There's outside of James Washington, I don't think there's anybody that's really competing for volume while Michael Gallup's out. It's not going to be Noah Brown, who they did bring back. They do have some undrafted free agents who might make the team. They have a second-year wide receiver in Simi Fehoko. But if you had to put eggs in any basket that wasn't CeeDee or Michael Gallup, it's probably Jalen Tolbert with a little bit of James Washington on the side.
Well, one guy who's going to get plenty of volume in targets is Dalton Schultz. He's right now the tight end 6 in ADP. Had 104 targets last year. There's no Blake Jarwin this year. Are we looking at an even better season potentially for him?
It's not the same thing as the running back position, obviously, but Dalton Schultz is on the franchise tag, and the Cowboys have no intention of meeting any kind of demand next year. If given that he's on the franchise tag, he has to work out a long-term deal by July 15th, or else he can't this year. And so maybe that happens. Maybe they do come to terms on some sort of team-friendly deal. But if they don't, particularly, I mean, they will bleed that dry. I mean, they will make sure they get their money's worth. They're paying him almost $11 million for this season, if it is the tag value. And so I totally see that. Plus, I mean, if there's anybody, especially in the time that Michael Gallup's out, that will benefit from all of that, it's Dalton Schultz. He's the biggest sort of security blanket for Dak Prescott. He's the player. He's the passing weapon that Dak Prescott literally has the most familiarity with on the team. He and Michael Gallup both came onto the team in 2018. Everybody else has joined. Every legitimate player, at least, has joined after that. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm all, personally, if you can't get, Travis Kelce or George Kittle or maybe Darren Waller, I think you're fine kind of throwing a dart at anybody else. I don't know that I would pay what it will cost to draft Dalton Schultz, but I think you can feel good about it if you wind up with him on your team.
Yeah, I think he's going, he's going overall in pick number 64, which is started in the early part of the 6th round. It's not too local on that one. Not too local on that one. Awesome. I just love the candor and the just really staying down the middle on this one. Offensive line. I mean, it's not 2016 anymore. So obviously they drafted a rookie to augment the offensive line. What this still has some great names on it. What is the outlook on that group?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like the place that you've gone and had dinner at that you just really love, like right, it's your birthday and you're like, I love that place, and it might not, the food might not actually be as good as you think it is, but it's just part of your life. I mean, you said it. They have Tyron Smith and Zach Martin. Boom, big names. But I mean, Tyron Smith hasn't played a full season since Dak Prescott was drafted. Dak has never had Tyron Smith for a full season, and he's entering year 7. Zach Martin is awesome and kind of bounced back in the health department last year, and I think you can totally trust him. But okay, so you've got Tyler Smith at left guard, a prospect that a lot of national draft analysts weren't supremely high on. So life will be a little bit difficult in general, let alone whenever Tyron Smith does miss time, his anchor on his left side will be gone. At the center position, the Cowboys have Tyler Biadasz, who's entering his 3rd year. He's been fine. Again, he's not Travis Frederick. These definitely aren't your older brothers Cowboys. And at right tackle, the Cowboys have Terrence Steele, who was an undrafted free agent for them 2 years ago, who they believe in. And they believe in so much that they released Lyle Collins this offseason. And so I wouldn't say it's put together with glue and scotch tape, but it is it's a hard blow from the big bad wolf away from falling down. It's not the house of straw, but it's the house of twigs. And so at that, they don't have a swing tackle really in place that anybody feels great about. So the moment that they are challenged from an injury standpoint, and that will happen because it's the NFL, it will be difficult to really trust them and really feel good about them. Which is, kind of the storyline of the season. If they're right, if Tyler Smith is awesome, if Terrence Steele is awesome, if Tyron Smith stays healthy, kudos to you guys, Cowboys. Drag us. Tell us how stupid we were. But the overwhelming likelihood is that they're kind of overestimating their own abilities here, and they're a little bit in over their skis.
Let's look into a quick look on the defensive side. I kind of want to see kind of how you feel like they're going to look both against the run and against the pass, just the outlook. Obviously, let's start with against the pass. Trayvon Diggs was such a revelation as far as interceptions are concerned. Obviously got beat a few times. Micah Parsons was one of the great pass rushers on the season. So how's the feeling again, how this team shapes up against the pass this year?
Well, they did lose Randy Gregory, who was one of their better edge rushers last season. And, I think people are fairly expecting DeMarcus Lawrence to not miss as much time as he did last year. So there is some kind of balancing there. But they did not really bring in another edge rusher. They did draft Sam Williams in the 2nd round. So they do have that. But unless you're Micah Parsons, it's very, very difficult to have an impact as a pass rusher, as a rookie. So I think that their pass rushing group is weaker, depending, that's contingent upon how much they utilize Micah Parsons as a pass rusher. Obviously, he can be utilized a number of different ways. But I think it's very fair to say that Trayvon Diggs won't have 1,000 interceptions the way he did last year. And that's okay. I think he can still develop and grow and improve as a player without, that happening. But he will very likely regress towards the mean. But it wasn't just him. I mean, the Cowboys had a lot of takeaways on defense. They had a lot of interceptions. And what they are fortunate with this season, like they were last year, is they're going to play a lot of really bad quarterbacks. I mean, they played the NFC East, which is not exactly ripe with great passers. They play the AFC South, and even then, the best quarterback in that division is Ryan Tannehill, all due respect to Matt Ryan. And he might not even play when they're playing. They play him in the penultimate week of the regular season. So, I mean, who knows if it's Malik Willis by that point. Yes, they play Tom Brady. Yes, they play Aaron Rodgers and Matthew Stafford, and those things are tough. But and Joe Burrow, obviously, in the 2nd week of the season. But more often than not, they're going to be facing some lower quality quarterbacks. And so that will help. And that is part of what they're kind of banking on as well, that the competition quality is really low and that they can kind of skate by. They've been fortunate with that the last couple of years.
How did they shape up against the run this year?
They almost also said goodbye to DeMarcus Lawrence throughout the offseason, which would have been a really big loss. He doesn't have the sack numbers that a lot of Cowboys fans would like, but he's their best defender against the run. And so to have him back, to conceivably have him for more time this season, I think is a really good thing. I think that the strength of the Cowboys interior along their defensive line is a little bit underrated. Osa Digizua, I think, would have had a lot of chatter about him for Defensive Rookie of the Year last year if Micah Parsons hadn't existed. And so they have some quality depth there along the interior. Again, that second edge rush spot is a little bit suspect. They brought Leighton Vander Esch back. Who knows if he's able to kind of stay healthy again. But the front seven is in a pretty stable, solid place overall. I don't exactly expect them to get run over, although that was a big problem for them in the playoff loss to the Niners. But they've made the Cowboys have been criticized a lot by us frankly, for being soft in the playoff loss to the 49ers. And they have made a real emphasis on getting tougher and getting meaner and however else you want to put it, so that they don't get embarrassed like that again. I think that was a really humbling experience for them. So I do expect them to be a little bit more rowdy and tough in that sense.
Fantastic. Just what a great breakdown, RJ. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. So I got one fun one to close out with. You're obviously in Texas. And Texas is really known for its Mexican food all over the place. But obviously there's a lot of differences. It's such a huge state. What city has the best Mexican food in Texas?
Born and raised in the Rio Grande Valley, and that's where my family and I live now. And I think that, best is such a particular word. If you ask me the most authentic, I would probably say, the Rio Grande Valley, because you're right here, you're right near the border. I define best as like experience and entertainment and opportunity and number of options. My wife and I met and started dating and got married while living in San Antonio. And I think, San Antonio, you're south enough that you still maintain that kind of culture of the border. But you have a lot more options. And while I know that your question is about Mexican food, you do have options for other things. I mean, it's a big enough little town that it's a city, but it's a small enough city that you don't feel disconnected from that kind of culture. And you get the best of both worlds, I think. And so we loved our time in San Antonio. So if it weren't San Antonio, I think Houston is a little bit slept on. It still, has a little bit of that stronger southern border flavor. As well. So I'd say, the Rio Grande Valley is probably the most authentic. San Antonio comes in at number one for me. Houston, a close two. I think Austin probably has the most interesting food. But again, you got to be in the right kind of mood to go down, a palate cleansing in the city of Austin.
Oh yeah, that's the city that I want to visit. So I've, as I told you, I've done Houston and Arlington and down in Brownsville, McAllen. So yeah, had good meals all over the place. Although I will say one of the best ones, probably the best one I ever had was at my tio and tia's backyard, where they just grilled up some carne asada because it was the night before for the rehearsal dinner for my prima's wedding. So. But hey,
that's hard to beat. Those are the best times. So that's the right answer.
Yeah, never be familia always first, mi amigo. Familia always first. Hey, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's so great to catch up with you. Familia. He is a great follow on Twitter, and I'm gonna give you a chance to just kind of pump everything.
Sure. On Twitter and Instagram at RJ Ochoa. As mentioned, those are kind of hubs for everything I do. You can search Blog on the Boys basically anywhere you get any kind of content. Obviously, our website, blogontheboys.com. Wherever you get your podcast, you can search for Blog on the Boys, subscribe to us there. Our YouTube channel. Obviously, we're on Facebook. Lately, I've been experimenting with some TikToking. So somebody had the username RJ Ochoa, and that really upset me. So I had to throw a period in there. So RJ.Ochoa. It's never stopping. It's always changing, always growing. And so just seeing what we can do to do some different things and explore some different avenues. But yeah, we're excited. This is kind of the last big breath before the marathon of the season. So ready for it to happen and, ready to see, how the Cowboys surprise us. They always find a way. So I'm sure it'll be very interesting.
Yeah, they're always interesting. That is the one thing. That is the one thing. And the eyeballs are always on them. Probably you got to figure at least a half dozen times the Cowboys are going to be on that late window on Sundays. So love it. Love it. I can't wait thank you. Muchas gracias for kind of filling this void between now and the start of training camp. That's why I kind of really want to try and get these all knocked out before the start of training camp. And because that's when that's when we really got to start following the news. Familia, eso es todo for our show. Again, muchas gracias to our invitado de lujo, RJ Ochoa. Again, muchas gracias for that. And make sure you're going to YouTube, and giving us a like and subscribe. Also, you can get us on audio anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify. Thank you, Anchor, for putting us out there. And fantasypoints.com, familia. Put in familia 22, familia 22. Get 10% off on there when you get your subscription. Otra vez. Definitely make sure to go to familiaffb.com or familiaffb at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Otra vez, muchas gracias, everybody. And remember, todos somos familia. Salud.